In conclusion, we deeply value this opportunity for cultural exchange and look forward to a prosperous relationship between our species. As Captain Elena Thornton finished her carefully rehearsed speech, Diplomatic Officer Jack Holloway let out the breath he'd been holding. So far, so good. The delegation of Krivax representatives stood before them, 7-foot-tall reptilian humanoids with iridescent scales that shifted between emerald and cobalt. Their unblinking yellow eyes and perpetually exposed teeth made them look like they were always contemplating which human to eat first. Jack resisted the urge to tug at his collar. Sweat trickled down his back despite the station's climate control. The Krivax were the most feared predatory species in this sector of the galaxy, and humanity's first diplomatic mission with them was resting on his shoulders. Well, technically on Captain Thornton's shoulders, but Jack was the xenocultural expert who'd prepared all the briefings. Ambassador Zarak, the Krivax leader, stepped forward. His throat sac expanded as he prepared to speak. The Krivax Imperium acknowledges your enthusiasm. Jack winced internally. Not a great start. We have considered your proposal for shared territory on Station Gamma 9, Zarak continued. However, there is a matter of great importance. The station's eastern quadrant has been designated as our hatchery zone. Of course, Captain Thornton nodded graciously. We've marked all Krivax exclusive zones on our station maps. Jack stepped forward, eager to demonstrate his knowledge. We've studied your customs extensively, Ambassador. Your species' protectiveness of your young is something humans deeply respect. In fact, we have a saying on Earth, it takes a village to raise. Ambassador Zarak's throat sac inflated to twice its previous size, turning a violent shade of red. The universal translator crackled with a hiss as Zarak interrupted. You dare speak of our hatchlings? The sacred future of our lineage? Jack froze. The other human diplomats stared at him in horror. I was merely expressing respect for. Silence. Zarak roared. No species except the Krivax may discuss, observe, or even think about our young. This is the most egregious violation of protocol since the Gazorpians attempted to send an educational delegation to our homeworld. Jack vaguely remembered reading about how that particular diplomatic mission had ended with the Gazorpians becoming an endangered species. Captain Thornton stepped in smoothly. Ambassador, please accept our deepest apologies. Officer Holloway meant no disrespect, he's new to interstellar diplomacy. Jack winced. He'd been doing this for 7 years. The ambassador's scales rippled in what Jack recognized as the Krivax equivalent of a derisive snort. Your kind is impulsive and unpredictable. This is why no Krivax would ever trust a human within 50 parsecs of our hatchlings. The meeting deteriorated from there. By the time they were escorted back to their quarters, Jack had managed to accidentally insult the ambassador's lineage, imply that Krivax scale patterns looked cute, and trip over his own feet, nearly colliding with a ceremonial egg replica that was apparently worth more than the entire human diplomatic vessel. That could have gone better, Lieutenant Patel muttered as they entered their assigned quarters. Jack, Captain Thornton said, pinching the bridge of her nose, maybe you should take some time to review the cultural briefs. Again. Yes, Captain, Jack replied, wishing he could disappear into the station's recycling system. At this rate, he'd be lucky if they didn't send him back to Earth on the next transport. As he slumped onto his bunk, the station's alert system suddenly blared to life. Attention all personnel. Containment breach in Sector 7. Emergency protocols engaged. Proceed to designated evacuation points. Perfect. Just perfect. Jack scrambled to his feet as red emergency lights bathed the room. The station's AI calmly repeated its warning as crew members rushed past their quarters. What's in Sector 7? Jack shouted to Lieutenant Patel over the blaring alarms. Research labs. she yelled back, grabbing her emergency kit. They've got everything from microscopic parasites to those giant acidic slugs from Betelgeuse. Captain Thornton emerged from her quarters, already in full emergency gear. Everyone to evacuation point Delta. Now. They joined the flow of panicked station personnel rushing through the corridors. Aliens of all shapes and sizes pushed past them, gelatinous Morbians flowing like quicksilver, spider-like Arachnians scuttling along walls, even a few Krivaks, their scales flashing warning colors. Jack felt himself being pushed away from his team by the surging crowd. "Captain," he called, but his voice was lost in the chaos. A sudden surge of panicked Gloopians, essentially living water balloons with anxiety issues, knocked him sideways into a maintenance corridor. By the time he regained his footing, the door had sealed shut behind him. Emergency containment protocols. Great, he was trapped. "Hello?" he called into his communicator. Nothing but static. The station's communication system must have been affected by whatever catastrophe was unfolding. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit by emergency lighting. Jack consulted his wrist device, which displayed a rudimentary map of the station. If he continued forward, he might be able to reach another evacuation point. As he moved deeper into the maintenance section, the station shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and Jack was thrown against a wall. Something was seriously wrong. After several minutes of navigating through increasingly unfamiliar parts of the station, Jack found himself facing a sealed door with Krivak symbols etched into its surface. His translator device flickered to life. Hatchery, authorized Krivak's personnel only. "Oh no, no, Jack muttered. Of all the places to end up, he'd stumbled upon the most forbidden zone on the entire station. Another violent tremor shook the station. The door's locking mechanism sparked and malfunctioned. To Jack's horror, it slid open, revealing a warm, humid chamber bathed in a soft amber glow. Inside, arranged in precise rows on heated sand beds, were dozens of leathery eggs. Krivak's eggs. Real ones, not ceremonial replicas. "I am so dead," Jack whispered. The station's computer chose that moment to update its announcement. Containment failure in multiple sectors. Station-wide lockdown initiated. All bulkheads sealed for minimum of 3 hours. Jack stared at the eggs in mounting panic. He couldn't leave. The door had sealed behind him, and he couldn't communicate with anyone. He was trapped in the most sacred and forbidden Krivak space. As he contemplated his impending diplomatic execution, Jack noticed something alarming. Several of the eggs were rocking slightly. The environmental control panel nearby was flashing a warning, temperature rising to critical levels for Krivak's embryo development. Whatever emergency had struck the station had affected the hatchery's climate controls. The eggs were being forced into premature hatching. Through a view screen on the far wall, Jack suddenly noticed frantic movement. A group of adult Krivaks, including Ambassador Zarak, were visible in what appeared to be an observation room. They were gesturing wildly, their scales flashing distress patterns. One was hammering futilely on a sealed bulkhead door. They could see him. They could see him standing in their sacred hatchery, surrounded by their vulnerable offspring. And they couldn't get in. As if to confirm this nightmare scenario, a crackling sound came through a partially functioning communication system. Human. It was Ambassador Zarak's voice, distorted but recognizable. "If you touch a single egg, I swear by the 17 moons of Krivaxia that your species will know suffering beyond imagination." As if on cue, the egg nearest to Jack split open with a wet crack. A tiny snout poked through the leathery shell, followed by gleaming yellow eyes that blinked rapidly in the light. The hatchling chirped, a surprisingly delicate sound from a species known for devouring their enemies whole. Jack stood frozen, acutely aware of Ambassador Zarak watching his every move through the view screen, throat sac inflated to an alarming size. "I'm not touching anything," Jack called out, raising his hands. "I just got trapped in here during the evacuation." Another egg cracked, then another. The rising temperature was triggering a mass hatching. The first hatchling fully emerged, a foot-long miniature version of the adults, but with softer scales and disproportionately large eyes. It chirped again, more insistently this time. "They're hatching too early," came a strained voice over the comm. Not Zarak this time, but another Krivax. "The incubation cycle is incomplete." Jack glanced at the environmental controls again. The temperature's rising too fast. "Is there any way to stabilize it?" "The control system is locked." The voice was frantic now. "The hatchlings will die if the temperature continues to rise. They cannot thermorgulate until their third day." Jack looked back at the tiny creatures emerging from their shells. Despite their fearsome lineage, they seemed incredibly vulnerable. The first one was trying to stand on wobbly legs, chirping pitifully. What should I do?" Jack asked, surprising himself with the question. There was a long silence, broken only by more cracking sounds as eggs continued to hatch. Finally, Ambassador Zarak's voice came through, each word sounding physically painful for him to say. "Human, the fate of our next generation rests in your hands. You must help them." "I don't know anything about Krivax hatchlings," Jack protested. "They need cooling," another voice instructed. "Their bodies cannot handle this temperature." Jack looked around frantically for anything useful. His eyes landed on his water canteen. He unscrewed it and poured some water onto his handkerchief. "Is it safe to touch them?" he asked. A pained growl came through the speaker. "Yes, gently. Place the damp cloth over their dorsal scales." Jack approached the nearest hatchling, which hissed weakly at him. Moving slowly, he draped the damp cloth over its back. The hatchling immediately stopped hissing and made a trilling sound. "It worked," Jack exclaimed. But there were at least 20 more eggs hatching, and he had only one handkerchief. "Improvise, human," Zarak barked. Jack's mind raced. "My college roommate had an iguana," he muttered, searching through his pockets and emergency pack. "They'd overheat sometimes too." He found more cloths in his emergency kit, then spotted a small container of drinking water in a station employee alcove. Working quickly, he created more cooling compresses. One by one, the hatchlings emerged, and one by one, Jack attended to them. He arranged them in the coolest corner of the room, using his uniform jacket as a barrier against the hot floor. "They need hydration," a female Krivax instructed through the comm. "There should be nutrient gel in the blue containers by the far wall." Jack located the containers and, following instructions, carefully helped each hatchling consume small amounts of the gel. Some were more cooperative than others. One particularly feisty one tried to bite his finger, revealing tiny teeth that would someday grow into fearsome fangs. "Easy there, Chompy," Jack said, quickly pulling his hand back. "I'm trying to help you." Through the view screen, he could see the adult Krivax watching his every move intently. Their expressions were unreadable to human eyes, but their rigid postures betrayed their tension. Hours passed. Jack lost track of time as he moved from hatchling to hatchling, cooling them, feeding them, making sure none wandered toward the still hot areas of the floor. He found himself talking to them constantly, a stream of soothing nonsense that seemed to calm them. "That's it, little guy, you're doing great." "Oh, don't eat that. That's my communication device, not food." "Good job, Chompy, showing some initiative there." To his surprise, the hatchlings began to respond to him. They followed his movements with their large eyes and chirped when he spoke. A few even began to approach him voluntarily, rubbing their heads against his hand in a behavior that reminded him suspiciously of affection. Through it all, the Krivak's parents watched in silence. The station's alert system suddenly changed its tone. Warning, xenobiology containment level 9 breach. Predatory specimen loose in maintenance corridors. Jack's blood ran cold. He looked up at the view screen, where the Krivaks were now in visible distress, their scales flashing alarm patterns. "What's a level 9 specimen?" Jack asked, dreading the answer. Ambassador Zarak's voice was grim. A Nexonian shadow hunter. It was being transported to a secure research facility. Jack had studied enough xenobiology to feel his stomach drop. Shadow hunters were apex predators, known for hunting in absolute darkness and sensing heat signatures. They were essentially living nightmares, 6 limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, multiple rows of teeth, and an exoskeleton that could withstand most conventional weapons. "And it's in the maintenance corridors," Jack stated flatly. "The same corridors that connect to this room." The ominous silence from the Krivaks confirmed his fears. As if on cue, the lights flickered and died, plunging the hatchery into darkness. Only the emergency strips along the floor provided any illumination, barely enough for Jack to see the huddled shapes of the hatchlings. A distant scraping sound echoed through the ventilation system. "It's coming," one of the Krivaks whispered through the comm. Jack gathered the hatchlings closer. They sensed his tension and began making distressed noises. "Is there anywhere safer in here? A containment area? Anything?" "No," Zarak replied. "The hatchery is designed to be open for the caretakers to move freely." Jack's mind raced. The shadow hunter would be drawn to heat signatures, and right now, 20 warm little hatchlings would look like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The scraping grew louder. Something was moving inside the wall. Jack looked around desperately for anything he could use as a weapon. The hatchery was deliberately designed with smooth surfaces and rounded edges, nothing that could accidentally harm a hatchling. "Ambassador," Jack called out, "I need you to tell me everything you know about shadow hunters. Weaknesses, anything." As Zarak began listing off information, most of it terrifyingly unhelpful, Jack continued scanning the room. His eyes landed on the environmental control panel. It was malfunctioning, but not completely dead. The scraping stopped. A faint hissing sound came from a ventilation grate in the corner. Jack's hand closed around a metal cylinder in his emergency kit, a high-intensity light flare meant for signaling during evacuations. If shadow hunters preferred darkness. A section of the ventilation grate bulged outward, metal screeching as something pushed against it from inside. "Get the hatchlings behind you," Zarak commanded. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He gathered the chirping babies into the furthest corner, positioning himself between them and the grate. The largest one, Chompy, hissed defiantly over Jack's shoulder. With a sound like tearing metal, the grate burst open. In the dim emergency lighting, Jack caught glimpses of a nightmarish shape unfolding itself from the vent, multiple limbs, a segmented body, and eyes that reflected the meager light like burning coals. The shadow hunter paused, tasting the air with a forked tongue. "Hey, ugly," Jack shouted, hoping to keep its attention on him rather than the hatchlings. The creature's head swiveled toward him with unnatural speed. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Jack waited until it gathered itself to spring, then ignited the light flare. Blinding white light flooded the chamber. The shadow hunter screeched a sound that sent ice down Jack's spine and recoiled, multiple limbs covering its light-sensitive eyes. But Jack knew the flare wouldn't last long. He needed a more permanent solution. As the creature retreated temporarily to the shadows, Jack made a dash for the environmental control panel. If he could override the lockdown on just one function. The shadow hunter recovered faster than he expected. It lunged, one clawed limb slashing across Jack's back. White-hot pain exploded between his shoulder blades, but adrenaline kept him moving. He reached the panel and smashed the emergency override button with his fist. Using his security clearance code, which technically shouldn't work here, but the emergency might have reset some protocols, he managed to gain partial access. The shadow hunter was circling now, its eyes fixed on the huddle of hatchlings. Jack's diversion had only bought them seconds. Come on, Jack muttered, frantically adjusting settings. The station's auxiliary systems were responding sluggishly, but they were responding. Just as the creature tensed for another attack, Jack slammed the final command. The sprinkler system activated, dousing the room in fire suppression foam. Simultaneously, he managed to trigger the hatchery's UV sterilization system normally used between clutching cycles to eliminate bacteria. The combination was devastating to the shadow hunter. The foam clung to its exoskeleton, weighing it down while the UV light caused it visible distress. It thrashed and screeched, tearing gouges in the floor with its claws. Jack grabbed a detached piece of ventilation duct and, ignoring the searing pain in his back, charged the disoriented creature. With all his strength, he brought the metal tube down on what he hoped was a vulnerable joint in its exoskeleton. The shadow hunter emitted a high-pitched wail. Jack struck again and again, driven by pure protective instinct. Through the view screen, the Krivax watched in astonishment as a single unarmed human battled one of the most feared predators in the galaxy to protect hatchlings that weren't even his own species. Eventually, the creature retreated, squeezing its injured body back through the ventilation shaft and disappearing into the darkness. Jack collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The hatchlings immediately swarmed around him, chirping in what sounded remarkably like concern. Chompy headbutted his arm repeatedly, as if urging him to get up. Through the pain and exhaustion, Jack managed a weak smile. "Don't worry, kids. I'm not going anywhere." Blood seeped through the back of Jack's uniform. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Still, he kept the hatchlings close, watching the damaged ventilation grate warily. "Human," Ambassador Zarak's voice came through clearer now the communications were gradually being restored. "You're back. You're injured." "I'll be fine," Jack lied, wincing as he shifted position. "The shadow hunter might come back. I need to keep the hatchlings safe." There was a pause before Zarak responded, his voice strangely subdued. "There is a medical kit. Green cabinet, left wall." Jack spotted it and crawled over, the procession of hatchlings following him like ducklings. The cabinet contained various alien medical supplies, most of which Jack couldn't identify. The silver canister, Zarak instructed. "It contains wound sealant. It will be uncomfortable, but effective." The uncomfortable proved to be a massive understatement. When Jack managed to awkwardly spray the sealant onto his wounds, it felt like liquid fire. He bit down hard on his lip to keep from screaming in front of the hatchlings who were watching him with curious eyes. Through the pain haze, Jack noticed something remarkable. The hatchlings had formed a protective circle around him. Chompy, the largest, had positioned himself facing the damaged vent, his tiny body tensed as if ready to defend against another attack. Jack couldn't help but laugh, despite the pain. "Look at you, ready to take on a monster 10 times your size. You're going to be a tough one someday." From the observation room, the female Krivax spoke, her voice filled with wonder. "They're imprinted on you. This is unprecedented." "Is that bad?" Jack asked, suddenly concerned. "No," Ambassador Zarak replied slowly. It is extraordinary. As the hours passed, the station's systems began to recover. Updates filtered through the patchy communication system. The containment breach was under control, and emergency teams were working to override the lockdown protocols. Jack used the time to learn more about Krivak's hatchlings, asking questions that would have been forbidden just a day earlier. To his surprise, the Krivaks answered freely, their earlier hostility replaced by something approaching reluctant respect. He learned that Krivak's young typically imprinted on the first 3 adults they encountered after hatching, forming a protection triangle. Somehow, these hatchlings had accepted Jack as one point of that triangle. They recognized protective intent, the female Krivaks, who had introduced herself as Clutch Guardian Eka, explained. It transcends species boundaries. In all our history, Ambassador Zarak added, no non-Krivaks has ever been accepted by our young. We believed it impossible. Jack gently stroked Chompy's head as the hatchling dozed against his leg. Maybe we're not so different after all. Protecting the vulnerable is pretty universal. Just then, a loud clang echoed through the chamber as the emergency crews finally managed to breach the sealed doors. Both human and Krivak's rescue teams poured in, then stopped short at the bizarre tableau: a human surrounded by sleeping Krivak's hatchlings, all of them covered in fire suppression foam. Captain Thornton pushed her way to the front, her face a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Jack, are you babysitting? Before Jack could answer, Ambassador Zarak emerged from the newly unsealed observation room. The rescue teams parted respectfully as he approached Jack. For a long moment, the ambassador simply stared at the human and the sleeping hatchlings. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he slowly lowered himself to one knee, a gesture of profound respect in Krivak's culture. Officer Holloway, he said formally, the Krivak's Imperium acknowledges a debt that can never be repaid. 2 weeks later, Jack stood in his dress uniform before the assembled diplomatic corps. His back still ached from the Shadow Hunter's claws, but he stood straight as Ambassador Zarak addressed the gathering. For millennia, the Krivaks have believed that our young could only be safe among our own kind, the ambassador began. We viewed all other species as potential threats. This belief has shaped our interactions, our diplomacy, our very civilization. The ambassador's gaze swept the audience before settling on Jack. Officer Holloway has shown us the error of our ways. When faced with our most vulnerable offspring, this human did not see an opportunity or a bargaining chip. He saw young ones in need of protection, and he acted accordingly. A murmur ran through the crowd. Captain Thornton, standing nearby, gave Jack a proud nod. The human phrase "actions speak louder than words" has new meaning for us now, Zarak continued. We have reviewed the security footage from the hatchery repeatedly. Officer Holloway fought a Shadow Hunter, one of the galaxy's most lethal predators, armed with nothing but a piece of metal tubing and his own determination. He sustained injuries that would have sent many Krivak's warriors retreating. Jack shifted uncomfortably under the praise. Anyone would have done the same, he muttered. No, Zarak said firmly, his hearing evidently better than Jack had realized. They would not. And that is precisely why this moment marks a turning point in Krivak's human relations. From behind the ambassador, Clutch Guardian Eka stepped forward, carrying a small ceremonial box. Officer Holloway, Zarak announced, the Krivak's High Council has unanimously voted to bestow upon you the title of Honorary Clutch Guardian, the first non-Krivaks in our history to receive this honor. Eka opened the box, revealing an intricately carved medallion of iridescent stone. From this day forward, you will have the right to enter any Krivak's hatchery, to assist in the raising of our young, and to be recognized as kin by all members of the Imperium. As Zarak placed the medallion around Jack's neck, a small chirp came from behind the ambassador's robes. A tiny scaled head poked out Chompy, significantly larger than he'd been 2 weeks ago, but still unmistakable with his distinctive eye markings. "Your first charge has been making quite a fuss about seeing you," Eka said, a hint of amusement in her voice. The hatchling darted forward and climbed up Jack's uniform with surprising speed, settling on his shoulder and bumping his head affectionately against Jack's chin. Captain Thornton stifled a laugh. "I think your diplomatic career just took an unexpected turn, Jack." Later at the reception, Lieutenant Patel sidled up to Jack, eyeing Chompy, who refused to leave his shoulder with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "You know what they're saying in the mess hall?" she asked. "They're saying this changes everything. The Krivaks have trade routes throughout the galaxy, alliances with species that have been avoiding us. Suddenly, we're everyone's favorite neighbors." Jack gently offered Chompy a piece of approved hatchling treat. "All because I got lost during an evacuation and ended up being a reluctant babysitter." "No," Ambassador Zarak said, approaching from behind. "All because when faced with vulnerable young not of your species, your instinct was to protect rather than exploit. This quality, it appears to be inherent to humans." The ambassador's throat sac expanded slightly in what Jack now recognized as thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps this is why, throughout the galaxy, species that have encountered humans often end up trusting them with what they value most. Your kind has a peculiar talent for inspiring trust even from predators like us." Jack scratched under Chompy's chin, earning a pleased trill. "I guess sometimes you just need to get thrown into the deep end to discover what you're capable of." "Indeed," Zarak agreed, "and today the galaxy learned why even predators trust humans with their cubs.